I've been assigned to worse postings than the Thren formation carrier Imminence, but none where the welcome party tried this hard not to touch me. They floated. That was the first thing. The Thren don't walk. They drift. About 3 meters of translucent membrane stretched over a gas-filled cavity, trailing half a dozen manipulator tendrils that never quite settle on anything solid. Their repair systems work the same way. Resonance fields, calibrated harmonics, targeted vibration pulses that can realign a misseated component from across a compartment. They haven't physically touched a piece of machinery in, as far as I could work out, roughly 400 years. So when I stepped aboard with my toolkit, an 80-liter hard case, standard-issue Coalition repair set, plus a few personal additions I've been carrying since my first rotation on the Harlan, they gathered around it the way you'd gather around a display case at a natural history museum. "This is the equipment," said Convoy Director Velos, hovering beside me in the entry bay. The color in his membrane shifted toward a pale amber. I'd been told amber meant amusement, or digestive settling. The briefing materials hadn't been specific. "That's the kit, yes. All of it. All of it." Velos drifted closer. One of his forward tendrils extended toward the wrench set, the 15-piece chromium spread I've had since the Kelder rotation, and stopped about a centimeter short. The gesture reminded me of someone hovering their hand over a stove burner. And you apply these directly to the component. That's the general idea. The amber deepened. 2 junior Thren behind him pulsed the same shade. I learned later that there was a running joke aboard the Imminence that human repair technique consisted of striking things until they consented, which was only about 40% accurate, and even then, you had to know where to strike. They gave me Bay 11. It was the last bay on the repair deck, past the resonance chambers and the harmonic alignment suites, tucked behind a coolant relay nobody had serviced in 2 maintenance cycles. The bay had a work surface, a power tap, and exactly enough overhead clearance for a human being to stand upright without hunching. The Thren had been using it for surplus storage. They cleared it out in about 20 minutes and seemed to regard this as a meaningful act of hospitality. I set up my kit, hung my lamp, and spent the first 3 hours of my posting replacing a corroded ground lead on the power tap itself, by hand, with a splice tool and a length of insulated wire. 2 Thren drifted past the bay entrance during that time. Both slowed, both pulsed amber, neither offered commentary. By midday I'd inventoried the bay, logged my arrival report with Coalition liaison, and eaten half a sandwich sitting on my work surface. The Thren metabolize through membrane absorption. They don't eat solid food. So the sandwich drew a small audience of 3 who hovered near the entrance and watched me chew with what I can only describe as clinical fascination. The bread was from the Harlan's galley. It was good bread. I'd brought 4 loaves. The trouble started at 1340 hours, about 6 hours into my posting. A coupling in the Imminence's lateral stabilizer array slipped out of tolerance. Not catastrophically, just enough to flag a deviation on the formation-keeping readout. The Thren resonance team corrected for it remotely, reseated the alignment, and logged it as a level 1 adjustment, routine. At 1410, the same coupling slipped again. At 1430, a second coupling, ventral array, different quadrant, registered a deviation of its own. By 1500, operations had logged 9 corrections across 4 arrays, and the formation-keeping margin had narrowed from standard to advisory. I followed the updates on the liaison channel, which the Thren had given me mostly as a courtesy. They weren't concerned yet. Running resonance corrections was what the Thren did. This was an ordinary Tuesday for them. By 1600, it was no longer an ordinary Tuesday. The problem was physical. The couplings, heavy alloy joints connecting the stabilizer vanes to the primary hull frame, had developed microfractures along their seating surfaces. Cyclical stress over 3 years of continuous formation duty, which is exactly the kind of degradation that shows up when nobody puts a hand on the hardware. Resonance fields could compensate for misalignment all day long, but they could not repair a fracture. They could not bridge a gap in solid metal. For that, You needed someone who was willing to touch the component. I found out afterward that the Thren engineering staff had spent 40 minutes attempting to recalibrate their resonance systems to a frequency that would fuse the microfractures from the inside. Essentially harmonic welding at the molecular level. It was elegant, theoretically beautiful. It did not work, because the fracture edges weren't clean enough for harmonic bonding. They were rough, irregular, branching. The kind of failure profile you get from fatigued alloy, which doesn't care how sophisticated your vibration frequency is. Convoy Director Velos appeared at the entrance to Bay 11 at 1642. He was a deeper amber than I'd seen before, almost ochre, edging toward rust. I was fairly certain that was distress. 2 of his senior tendrils were coiled tight against his membrane. 3 members of his operations staff hovered behind him, tendrils drawn in close, membranes cycling through colors my briefing packet hadn't covered. Liaison Tor. Director. We have a structural matter. I heard. He drifted in the entrance for a moment. The membrane shifted through 2 further shades. Our resonance systems are unable to address the fracture geometry. I gathered. The stabilizer couplings require physical intervention. He said it the way a man might say the surgery requires a medieval barber. I put my coffee down. Show me the couplings. The ventral access shaft was designed for Thren, which meant it was tall enough for a gas bag to float through comfortably, and narrow enough that I had to turn sideways twice. The Thren resonance team, 4 senior technicians, watched from the shaft entrance as I climbed into the coupling housing with a work lamp clamped between my teeth, a torque wrench in my right hand, and a canister of fracture fill compound I'd mixed from stock in Bay 11. The work was straightforward. The microfractures had propagated along the grain boundaries of the alloy, opening hairline channels at the seating surfaces. I cleaned each channel with a wire brush, applied the fill compound with a narrow spreader, set it with a heat pen, then retorqued the coupling to spec. 14 couplings across the 4 arrays, 4 access shafts, roughly the same procedure each time. I started at 1700 and finished at 1935. When I climbed out of the last shaft, Velos was there. His membrane was pale, nearly translucent. The amber was gone entirely. Behind him, 2 operations officers hovered with their tendrils tucked in so tight they looked like smooth tubes. The formation-keeping readout on the corridor display showed all 4 arrays back within standard tolerance, green across the board. Liaison Tor, Director. The couplings are holding. They should be. The fill compound needs about 6 hours to cure fully, but the torque values are in spec. I'd suggest a manual inspection every 30 days going forward. It's cyclical fatigue. It'll come back eventually if nobody puts hands on it. Velos drifted there. His membrane shifted through a slow procession of colors. Ochre, amber, something cooler I hadn't seen before, then a shade that was almost clear. One of the operations officers behind him pulsed a color I had definitely never been briefed on. You applied a compound. Yes, with your hands. And a heat pen. Directly onto the coupling surface. That's where the fractures were, Director. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said something in rapid high Thren to his staff, too fast for my translator to process, and turned back. Liaison Tor. We would like to discuss a revision to the Imminence's maintenance schedule. All right? We would like to incorporate your physical techniques on a recurring basis. Hands-on inspection. Yes, that. Happy to set it up. He drifted away down the corridor. The operations officer who'd pulsed the unrecognized color lingered at the shaft entrance for a few seconds, tendrils twitching once. Then she pulsed amber, the same gentle amber they'd all been pulsing that morning when they first saw the toolkit, and followed her director around the bend. It occurred to me, walking back to Bay 11, that the shade probably still meant amusement, just a different kind than it had 12 hours ago. I cleaned my tools, logged the repair under the standard coalition maintenance code, and ate the other half of my sandwich. The bread had gone a bit stiff, but it was still good bread. The next morning, When I walked past the resonance chambers on my way to the bay, two Thren technicians drifted out of their suite and fell in alongside me. They didn't say anything, but they watched me open my toolkit with the kind of attention you give someone who knows something you don't. Quiet, close, and not remotely inclined to laugh. I picked up the 18mm wrench, turned it once in my hand, and started the daily rounds. Nobody mentioned the museum exhibit again.